It was just past midnight when Private Eli Mercer slipped through the undergrowth, his breath barely audible, his boots sinking softly into the wet forest floor as he moved deeper into the woods on what was supposed to be a routine night recon. The moonlight was patchy, filtered through a thick canopy of gnarled branches that twisted like skeletal arms above him, and the soft whisper of wind through the trees carried with it distant sounds he couldn't quite place. Maybe a bird, maybe a broken branch, maybe something else. The rest of the unit was spread out behind him in staggered formation, quiet as shadows, each man trained to disappear into the dark if needed. They were somewhere near the old ridge line. He knew that much, but the terrain was unfamiliar, and the forest had a way of swallowing sound, orientation, even time. He moved quietly, relying on instinct and the faint green hue of his night vision lens until a low rustle behind him made him turn instinctively. But no one was there. A second rustle, closer. Then silence. When he tried to re-establish comms with the rest of the group, he got only static. His radio crackled briefly with a garbled voice, unintelligible, then died completely. Something was wrong. He whispered a code phrase into the mic, waited, heard nothing in return. Maybe he was out of range. Maybe the others had pulled back. Maybe he'd taken a wrong turn. He told himself not to panic, to retrace his steps, but the underbrush all looked the same now. No landmarks, no familiar trees, no paths. And then it hit him. He was lost, alone, in full gear, heart pounding. He crouched beside a fallen tree and tried to listen, but the silence was too loud. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. He knew the worst thing he could do now was keep moving blindly, so he stayed low, checked his compass, useless, the needle jittering, and scanned the tree line. No lights, no voices, no flares, just dark, cold, leaves dripping from earlier rain. Suddenly, there was a low sound to his left, too soft to be a branch, too rhythmic to be wind. He froze. The sound came again, slow breathing, deliberate. Someone else was here. Eli lowered himself flat against the damp earth, held his breath, and listened. The breathing wasn't close, but it was steady, controlled, trained, not an animal. He crawled silently in its direction, inch by inch, until the outline of a body began to take shape among the brush. It wasn't one of his. The silhouette was wrong. Helmet shape unfamiliar. Uniform pattern unlike theirs. A rifle lay on the ground beside the figure, unattended. That was his first clue. The second came a second later when the figure shifted slightly and let out a sharp, involuntary grunt. Injured. Eli's training kicked in. Approach cautiously. Assess. Neutralize if needed. But something made him pause. This wasn't a combat situation anymore. The man, enemy or not, was hurt, alone, vulnerable, just like him. Eli crept closer, weapon ready, but his fingers trembled slightly. When he got near enough to see the man's face in the moonlight, he hesitated. There was blood on his forehead, smeared across his cheek, but his eyes weren't angry. They were afraid, defensive, and human. They locked eyes for a split second. Then the man reached slowly for his weapon. Eli could have stopped him, could have raised his rifle first, but instead he put a finger to his lips and shook his head. The enemy hesitated, then, surprisingly, nodded. The tension between them hung like a thread in the air, fragile, strange. Neither moved. Both breathed heavily. Slowly, Eli reached for his own canteen, unscrewed it, and held it out in an open palm. The injured man blinked, unsure, then took it carefully and drank. A quiet moment passed. The sounds of the forest resumed in the distance. An owl, some rustling leaves. They were still strangers, still enemies. But in that exact moment, something shifted between them. Survival, perhaps, overruled duty. Eli knew they couldn't stay there long. He gestured toward a thicket of bushes nearby, a better hiding spot, and then pointed to the wounded man's leg, which was visibly stiff and awkwardly angled. With slow movements, he helped the man to his feet, supporting his weight. The man grunted again, but did not resist. They moved together through the brush, a strange pair, two soldiers from opposite sides, one leaning on the other as they silently navigated the night. No words were exchanged, no weapons raised, just two exhausted souls, tangled in a war neither fully understood, bound now by circumstance and uncertainty. As they reached the thicket, Eli carefully laid the man down and crouched beside him, scanning the woods again. He still had no idea where his unit was, no map, no working radio. All he had was a fading sense of direction, his own instincts, and now, unexpectedly, a man who, just hours ago, would have tried to kill him. He didn't know what would happen when the sun came up, whether the man would turn on him. The cold had begun to seep in through Eli's uniform, wrapping itself around his limbs like a slow, creeping fog, but he didn't move. The man lying next to him hadn't spoken a word, yet his breathing had changed. Slower now, more even. Maybe it was relief, maybe shock. Eli still didn't know what to make of the situation. They were enemies by every definition, and yet here they were, curled behind the same curtain of leaves, silent partners in survival, watching the forest for any sign of movement, sound, or light. He kept glancing at the man's leg. It was clearly injured, likely a sprain or fracture, judging by the way he winced with each adjustment. The enemy soldier, probably no older than Eli himself, seemed just as unsure about what to do. There was tension, of course, but not the kind that begged for violence. It was more like two men stuck in a moment that defied the rules they were trained to follow. Eli considered trying to speak, but what language would even work? English? The man's uniform had no clear markings, no flag, no insignia he recognized in the dark. Still, gestures could go a long way. Eli took a small field bandage from his kit and pointed to the man's leg, raising his eyebrows to ask permission. The soldier hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. Carefully, slowly, Eli moved to wrap the ankle, tightening the bandage while the man gritted his teeth, refusing to make a sound. When it was done, the soldier gave a faint grunt of thanks, not a word, not a sentence, just a human noise that said, "For now, we are not enemies." The night crept onward, and in the distance there were faint echoes of movement. Boots, maybe, branches snapping, muffled radio static. Eli knew patrols were still nearby, his or theirs, he couldn't be sure. He motioned to the man to stay silent and still, finger over lips, hand down flat. The soldier understood. They both pressed tighter into the brush, barely breathing. Minutes passed, maybe more. Eventually the sounds faded again, swallowed by the woods. In the brief calm that followed, Eli did something unexpected. He took out a tiny piece of chocolate from his ration pack and handed it to the man. At first, the man stared as if unsure whether it was some trick. Then he reached out, took it, and ate it with small, slow bites, his eyes never leaving Eli's face. There was something surreal about it all. Two young soldiers, likely told their entire lives that the other was an enemy, now sharing food under the cover of trees and fear. Eli finally broke the silence, not with a speech, but with a single word. "Eli," he said, tapping his chest. The man squinted, then tapped his own chest and said, "Marek." Eli wasn't sure if he'd heard it right, but nodded anyway. Names. Names were powerful. They made things personal, less abstract, less disposable. Now they weren't just uniforms in the dark. They were Eli and Marek. The rest of the night passed slowly. At some point, Marek drifted into a light, uneasy sleep while Eli stayed awake, eyes scanning, ears tuned to every whisper the forest offered. The bond between them was fragile, like a rope fraying at both ends. But it was there. When the first faint light of dawn began to press through the trees, Eli knew they had to make a decision. He nudged Marek gently, and the man stirred, eyes wary but alert. Eli pointed in the direction he believed his unit had gone, then pointed the other way, raising his shoulders in a universal "which way" gesture. Marek didn't answer immediately. He sat up with a groan, looked around, and finally pointed toward the slope behind them, the opposite direction of where Eli had intended to go. Eli hesitated. Trusting Marek could mean walking into a trap, but then again, not trusting him could mean wandering deeper into nowhere. After a moment of thought, Eli nodded. He motioned for Marek to lean on him again, and together, slowly, they began to move. They didn't speak. The forest around them was still thick, damp, full of echoes. But the daylight helped. It made things feel slightly less threatening, even if danger still lurked. At one point, they passed a broken tree marked with strange graffiti, symbols, numbers, something left behind by someone who'd been there before. They paused, both reading it in silence, then moved on. Eli noticed how Marek limped more heavily now, every few steps requiring a pause. Eventually, they reached a rocky outcrop, a kind of natural shelter, and Marek slumped down, exhausted. Eli, crouched beside him, offered another sip from the canteen. That's when Marek pulled something from his own pocket, a folded, crumpled photo. He handed it to Eli without a word. It showed a little girl, maybe 4 years old, smiling awkwardly with missing teeth. Beside her was a woman with tired eyes. Family. Eli didn't ask questions. He just nodded, handed it back gently. Marek tucked it away with care. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, full of unspoken things, of lives far from here. The sun was already halfway through the sky when Eli and Marek finally reached the edge of the forest where the trees began to thin and the terrain opened into a broad, grassy clearing that sloped gently downward toward a narrow, broken road. From a distance it looked deserted. No smoke, no movement, no vehicles, just a cracked path of asphalt winding through hills like a scar. Eli crouched low behind a boulder, helping Marek ease down beside him, his leg trembling with exhaustion. They had been moving for hours, slow and careful, stopping often to listen, to check the trees behind them, to breathe. Despite their silence, a strange sense of trust had taken hold between them, not spoken, not formal, but understood in every glance, every shared effort. They were no longer just two soldiers from opposite sides. They were companions in survival, bound by the silence of the forest and the weight of uncertainty. Eli scanned the road again. There were distant tire marks, old, maybe abandoned supply routes, but no visible sign of life. Still, something about it made him wary. He turned to Marek, gesturing with his hands. "Stay or move?" Marek's face was pale, sweat glistening on his brow despite the cool morning air. His mouth opened as if to speak, but he hesitated, then pulled a small pencil stub from his pocket and began to scribble quickly in a small notebook he'd kept tucked under his vest. He tore the page out and handed it to Eli. The handwriting was rough but legible. "There may be a checkpoint near the bend," it read. "Could be yours. Could be mine." Eli looked up, meeting Marek's eyes. The risk was clear. If it was Marek's side, Eli would be taken prisoner, if not worse. If it was Eli's, then Marek? Well, Eli didn't know what would happen. He didn't want to think about it. He couldn't imagine explaining how he'd come through the forest with an enemy leaning on his shoulder, how they'd shared water and silence and names. He took the paper, folded it, and put it in his pocket. They had to move eventually. He helped Marek to his feet, and together they made their way down the slope, staying low, keeping to the tall grass. The road drew closer with each slow step. At the base of the hill, they paused behind a rusted fence post. From here, the curve of the road became visible, and so did the silhouette of a small concrete structure up ahead. A checkpoint. Eli squinted. The flag above it was torn, but it was his side, his people. Relief should have hit him like a wave, but it didn't. Instead, he felt a knot tighten in his chest. Marek saw it too. His lips pressed into a hard line. They were close enough now that a shout could bring soldiers running. Eli looked down at his rifle, then at Marek's empty hands. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He handed Marek his sidearm. Not loaded, just the empty weapon. A signal, a symbol, that this was not surrender, but trust. Marek took it slowly, confused, and looked at Eli as if searching for confirmation. Eli nodded once. Then they stepped onto the road. It didn't take long. Within seconds, voices shouted from the checkpoint. Soldiers emerged, weapons raised, confused and cautious. Eli raised both hands, called out his name, his unit. He pointed to his uniform, to the ID badge on his chest. The soldiers hesitated. Then, slowly, they lowered their rifles, but their eyes locked on Marek. "Who is he?" one of them barked. Eli hesitated. "He's with me," he said. That answer only raised more questions. Guns rose again. "With you? What do you mean with you? He's the enemy." Marek didn't speak. He stood still, quiet, his hands loose at his sides, the empty weapon still dangling in one. One soldier approached, grabbing Eli roughly by the vest. "Are you under duress? Blink twice." "No," Eli said, too quickly. "I'm fine. We got separated. I found him in the woods. He was injured. He didn't try to fight. We just survived." The soldiers exchanged skeptical looks. "Orders are clear," one muttered. "No exceptions. Especially not now." They motioned for Marek to drop the weapon and kneel. Eli's heart pounded. He stepped forward instinctively. "Wait. He's not a threat. Look at him. He could barely walk. He could have left me to die, or worse, but he didn't." But his words felt small in the face of protocol. A superior officer appeared from the booth, eyes narrowed behind dark glasses. "Take him into custody. The foreigner. We'll sort it out later." Eli opened his mouth again, but Marek turned and placed a hand gently on Eli's arm. Just for a moment. It said everything. It said thank you. It said, "I understand." Then he lowered himself to his knees, surrendering without a word. Eli watched as they cuffed him, led him toward a side tent, away from the road. No one looked back. He stood there, unsure of what to do, what to say. His mind spun with images of the forest, the silence, the photo of the little girl. Would Marek ever see her again? Would anyone ever hear what really happened out there? He doubted it. Back at base, the debriefing was cold and quick. He reported the events, but details were glossed over. They called it a capture, commended him, told him to get rest. Marek was mentioned only once, in passing, as a detainee for questioning. Eli nodded but said nothing. That night, in the barracks, while the others laughed over rations and card games, Eli sat on his bunk, staring at the folded paper Marek had given him. He hadn't told anyone about it. He unfolded it again and read the last line Marek had scribbled beneath the warning about the checkpoint. It was faint, rushed. "If we meet again, I hope it's without uniforms." Eli stared at the words until his eyes blurred. He folded the paper again, slower this time, and placed it inside his boot where no one would find it. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the branches beyond the wire fence. Somewhere out there, across lines and orders and silence, was a man he might never see again. But he would remember every step, every breath, every choice.